Hi friends, I'm Natalie Fox and I'm a registered dietitian, and in this video I'm going to take you along with me while I do my weekly meal prep. This is going to be largely unedited, so you can follow along if you'd like to meal prep with me, or you can use this as body doubling while you do your own meal prep. And I'm going to be sharing a lot of tips and tricks on how to make meal prepping easier along the way. So let's go. Before I do any kind of meal prep, there's a couple things I like to have. I like to have something to drink because I find that this just makes me feel more settled, and it's a step that I take to help me get into meal prep. So first I make my drink and then I start meal prep, and it helps me initiate that task. And then I also like to have a bowl like this for all of my kitchen scraps, because I find that if I don't put those little bits and bobs into one spot, they take over my counter and then I get a little bit overwhelmed and overstimulated, and it makes the cleanup process harder and it makes the cooking process feel a lot less pleasurable for me. So this is the other thing I always get started first. All right, so the first thing that I make with any meal prep is going to be some kind of grain or bean, something I can make in my Instant Pot. And I like to get that started first so that it's just cooking in the background. It's like a set and forget about. So today I'm gonna be making a mushroom barley kind of lentil stew. And I'm gonna make the lentils and the barley in the Instant Pot on the side. Now, the reason why I do that is because if I were to cook it in the pot, you can totally do that, but I find that I often miscalculate how much water I need, and it ends up becoming like a rice dish rather than a soup. So if I can cook these on the side, I'll do a little bit more. If I can cook these on the side, then I can make sure that I have the right broth to stuff ratio that I actually want. So I'm just going to do 1.5 cups of each of these, and I know that this is going to be too much probably, but I would rather have too much than too little, and any extra I'll probably just turn into something for my kiddo to eat. So now I'm cooking the lentils and the barley together because they take approximately the same cooking time in the Instant Pot. If I was cooking two things that had two different cook times, I wouldn't do this, but lentils and grains take similar amount of time. So now I just added all my water, and generally the ratio that I use for things where I don't want there to be extra liquid at the end of it is going to be 1 part of whatever grain or bean or whatever I'm using to 1.5 parts water. So now I'm going to put this in the Instant Pot for about 8 minutes. Forgot my lid. Oh. And if you want a more detailed breakdown on how I use my Instant Pot so that it's a little less overwhelming, because I know they can be, I did make a thorough tutorial, so I'll link that below. These are all done, so I'm just gonna get these out of my workspace. So next up, I'm gonna get the rest of my soup stuff together. And again, here, I like to just put my pot on my counter so that I'm not having to go back and forth a ton of times. And we're just gonna chop everything and stick it in the pot. Ew. Put that in my bowl. Now, a lot of people will do the whole chop one in, slice it. Ugh. I find that a little bit too fiddly for me personally. So I usually just cut the ends off, cut them in half like this. And then go like this. And I find that the chopping needs to be less precise. And I don't know, I find this easier. There's a lot of different ways to do things. Now, oftentimes when I'm doing a meal prep, I don't usually prep everything that I'm gonna make for the week because I find that to take too long and it's a little overwhelming. And I don't mind doing some cooking during the week. So when I'm thinking about a meal prep, what I'm really trying to focus on is what is the meal that I am most likely to skip, or the meal that I'm most likely to get some convenience food that's probably not gonna feel good in my body. That's usually the meal I focus on prepping. So for me, that meal is usually lunch. And then there are some times when I really want to have dinner prepped because, you know, I have a almost 1-year-old, and sometimes he's a little nuts in the evening. So having something that I can, if I need to, rely on so I don't have to cook in the evening, and I can, you know, make sure that I take care of baby and I'm not leaving it all on my husband is really helpful. So my goal when I'm doing a meal prep, actually, let's do the leeks next. Get all the onions. I love leeks in a soup because I feel like they add something extra texturally and flavorsomely. I feel like they add something extra to a soup besides just the onion. So leeks are one of my favorites, but I'm going to give this a quick wash. Okay. So back to what I was saying. For that reason, I really like to have something that can either be a dinner or be a lunch that can be ready to go with largely microwaving or very quick, like throwing together. So usually when I'm meal prepping, I do one pot item. So that could be like a soup, a baked pasta, casserole, something like that, enchiladas. And then I will do one thing that can be kind of thrown together. So I have two options in case one option doesn't sound good. And then usually me and my husband will kind of either have them for dinner or for lunch throughout the week. And then the other meals I tend to make myself. And that's mostly because I really like cooking. I don't find it to be a big barrier. It's something I find pleasurable. These I'm going to save for a different recipe later on in the week, probably. All right, now we're going to do some celery. Wah. So again, it's not that I'm doing every single meal 100% of the time, because I find for me, if I do that, one, I take up my whole weekend, which I don't want to sacrifice my whole weekend for that. And two, maybe something comes up and we don't end up eating it all. Maybe I don't want what I've made by the end of the week, but then I've made a bunch of food. So I don't know. That just doesn't tick boxes for me. And I also find that if you're not used to meal prepping, starting small like this with just one or two items that can be multiple meals throughout the week is a really good way to start without having it feel so overwhelming. Okay. The other thing I like to do is just as I'm finished with things, I like to put them away because, again, visual clutter for me makes the cooking process feel icky, and then it makes the cleanup afterwards a lot rougher. Putting the stuff away also gives me a bit of a dopamine hit of, oh, I finished it and I cleared it, which, I don't know, it tickles me. Okay. Now, we're gonna do our mushrooms. Actually, we're gonna wait on the mushrooms. We're not gonna do this yet. I changed my mind. We're gonna do a couple of potatoes. I don't know why, but in a soup, there is nothing I love better than potatoes in a soup the next day, because I feel like once the potatoes have cooked and cooled, the texture changes and it just, like, I don't know, they're awesome. It's my favorite thing. So if I can add potatoes to a soup, I'm gonna add potatoes to a soup. Now, I am peeling these because the peels make my husband's throat itch, but if you don't want to peel these, don't peel these. Peels are great. There are a lot of vitamins and minerals in them, a good source of fiber. There's no reason to peel your potatoes if you don't have some kind of like allergic reaction to them. And it does take extra work. I really don't love peeling potatoes, if I'm being perfectly honest. Now, I don't follow recipes pretty much ever. And the reason why I don't follow recipes is because, one, I think I have a bit of an allergy to them. Like, even when I try to follow a recipe, I feel like I get halfway through the recipe and I have completely gone rogue, or I've gotten frustrated with it. I just find them to be very tedious, because when I'm following a recipe, that means I have to measure things, and that is a huge barrier to cooking for me, because that means I'm gonna have to dirty a lot more dishes, like all of the measuring spoons, all the cups, all the things. Like, except for when it comes to certain ratios for using in my Instant Pot, I don't want to measure anything. Instead, I do everything by eye. Like, how much of this ingredient do I want in the soup? How full is my pot getting? Do I have more room? And generally, I like to err on the side of cook until the pot is full, because it's always better in my mind to have too much than too little, because if there's too much, I can always freeze it. If there's too little, I'm probably going to skip that meal, or I'm going to eat something that, I don't know. Again, I might be drawn to things that don't ultimately feel good for my body. And it's totally okay to have those kinds of like convenience options. I keep them in the house on hand for when I need to. And I don't have any like weird feelings about relying on those options. It's just that I want to set myself up for having those be the options that I need in an actual emergency, and not just because I didn't make enough soup. Or if they're options that sound good to me and I want to eat them. Having some of those things because they sound good to you is an awesome reason to have them. But again, I want to have them because that is what sounds good, and not because that like I'm going to it out of desperation on a regular basis. So if you guys are interested in this recipe, as I mentioned, I don't follow recipes. I'm not following a recipe here. This is not something that I have tested. I am just making something on the fly based on how I like it. So I will watch this video back and I will figure out what exactly I added and I will throw that on my website. So if you do want a recipe or you want to know the ingredients I'm using, I'll put a link to the recipe in the description box below so that you can use that. But I highly recommend, if you can, slowly working on letting go of recipes. The other advantage to letting go of a recipe, I will say, is that then you are really starting to cook based on your preferences and not based on somebody else's preferences. Because I think that what stops people up from actually trying new recipes is that they're not sure if it's going to taste good because somebody else may not have the same flavor preferences as you do. And I think for me personally, it's always a spice level. I find that a lot of people who make recipes do not add the amount of flavor and spice that I want. And for some people, it's very possible that the kind of spice profiles that I like are going to be too much for somebody. So if you can get used to cooking without a recipe based on your preferences and you can start to build that skill, which takes time and it does require following some recipes for a while to figure out what you like, it's going to be a lot less likely for you to cook something that you don't like because you know what you like and you know how to make it how you like. We are almost through our veg. Last thing I'm going to do are some carrots. Now, if you're watching me go through all of this peeling and chopping and you're going, geez, I don't want to do all that. Yeah, I totally get that. So some things you could do instead of all of this labor that I'm putting in here are you can use frozen vegetables. So like you can totally get some frozen diced onions. You can get frozen diced potatoes. You can get frozen diced carrots. And there's nothing wrong with putting those into a soup. So the texture might be a little bit different, but you could totally do that. Another thing that you could do is when you get home from the grocery store, pre-wash and pre-chop some of the veggies, like the hardier veggies that you're going to use, so that when it comes time to cook, you just have to dump them in. So basically what you're doing is you're breaking up the work over multiple days so that you're not doing as much work on any one day in any one setting. Or you can just opt to put in a smaller number of vegetables, not have quite so much variety if preparing all of these different veggie options feels like it's a barrier for you. That is also totally okay. So if I was going to do that for this recipe, I probably would skip the celery and I would be skipping these carrots. And that would make this a lot less labor intensive. Oh, that's got a little funky in the end. Let's just chop a bigger piece of that off. That's going to make this dish a lot less labor intensive because all I would be really doing are the potatoes and the onions and the garlic. In fact, I could even skip the garlic and you could just use garlic powder instead of adding fresh garlic because honestly, I added 2 cloves. I'm going to be adding garlic powder anyway. That is not enough garlic to do much of anything. I feel like I added it more out of ritual than anything. So, you know, there are a lot of ways to make this easier for yourself. I happen to really love the process of cooking, so I don't mind taking the long way around with a lot of this stuff. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes I am strapped for time. It is stressful. This isn't me time. Like a lot of times for me, cooking is me time. It's time when I can, put on something that I really like to watch, have some time without the kid needing things all the time. So it is usually when I get a bit of a break. So I love doing it. And again, I love doing the long way because that means more time for me. But not everybody likes cooking as much as I do. That is why I do this as a career. And if that's not you, I think that there can be a really strong societal pressure to do things a certain way and to do things the long and slow way and the from scratch way. And, that's well and good. There's a lot of benefits to doing that. But if you don't like doing that, if that is not something that you get pleasure out of doing, I think what often happens for those folks is they go, well, I should like it and I don't. So, they sort of get a little all or nothing about it and then they don't do anything. And there's a lot in between doing everything 100% from scratch with a lot of diversity and all that jazz and getting takeout. There's a huge What am I looking for? I don't know. My brain just rebooted. There's a lot of options between here and there is what I'm trying to say. For you, if you want the from scratch result, but you don't particularly love the from scratch experience, the question is, where can you make shortcuts? And I'll try to point out options as we go. Here is a bunch of veggies. I'm going to put water in this and I'm going to put it on the stove. For the liquid of any soup, I kind of just do it until it covers the veggies. I added a little extra because I'm going to be adding the grains to it at the end as well. And I'm just going to put it on my stove and put it on high. I'm also going to turn on my oven because the next thing that I'm going to make is going to require my oven. So we'll get that preheating. Oftentimes I will add like the bouillon or whatever straight into here. And I really love better than bouillon for that. I'm not doing that because I'm going to put some aside for my kiddo and he can't have too much salt right now. So I'm going to do that at the very end. Now this is a mushroom barley lentil soup. So now we're going to do the mushrooms and I'm just going to take a little slightly damp towel just to wipe off kind of the dirt. There's a couple of options, I think, when it comes to mushrooms and adding them to soups. I would say the two best ways to do it are to either saute it down before you add everything else, or to do what I'm about to do, and that is to kind of roast them separately. I will say that if you saute them down first, the broth or the soup is going to get a lot more of the mushroom flavor. So there's a huge advantage to doing that. The downside of that is that if the mushrooms, I think, are in the soup for a really long time, like they're in the broth, they can get this kind of waterlogged, rubbery texture unless you really, really cook them down. And I don't have the patience for that. Personally, I always think I'm going to do it that way. And then I always get impatient and then just dump a bunch of water into it. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice these. I'm going to put them on some parchment paper and I'm going to roast them in my little toaster oven on the side. So basically what that's going to do is it's going to roast out a lot of the water and it's going to change the texture, and the texture then in the soup will hopefully be less rubbery, because I love the mushroom flavor. I just don't always love the mushroom texture in liquid. Another way to kind of get around that is just to make them really, really, really small so they blend. You get the flavor into the broth. You're not getting bites of them so much. So I'm not doing that this time. I do that a lot of the time. I would say that's probably what I do most of the time. I'm not doing that this time because that's going to take a long time to chop, and I'm chopping a lot of other things. You could do it in a food processor if you wanted to, but I don't particularly feel like dirtying a food processor today. Now, while I'm doing this kind of tedious task, I will take this opportunity to say, if you are enjoying this video or you like this kind of content, don't hesitate to let me know. Feel encouraged to follow me and give this video a like. Also, if you guys have questions about meal prepping or nutrition generally speaking, or there's some topic that you'd like me to talk about while I'm doing food prep and in future videos, drop that in the comment section below too, because I'm happy to turn these little body doubling sessions into a bit of a Q&A. What would be helpful for you guys? Now, if you don't want to clean all your mushrooms like I just did, you can also get pre-cleaned, pre-chopped mushrooms. I honestly don't know why I didn't do that. I should have. Oh, I know why I didn't do that. Because they didn't come in a big container. They came in little containers where we were, and it was going to be more expensive. And with how groceries are right now, I would rather put in a little bit more labor than pay the extra cost personally. But speaking to that a little bit, because I think a lot of people shy away from getting pre-prepped veggies, pre-chopped veggies, because of the cost difference. And I will say, only make that cost benefit analysis if you're actually going to do the chopping. Because what a lot of people do is they go, I don't want to buy the pre-chopped onions, garlic, mushrooms, butternut squash, whatever. They don't want to buy it. And so they buy the unchopped version and then they don't actually do the cooking. And so the unchopped version ends up going to waste in their refrigerator or on their counter. And so if you're actually doing a cost benefit analysis, you have to factor in how likely you are to actually do that work. Because in reality, if that is probably what's going to happen to that produce, like if you're new to meal prepping and you have had this experience where you've had big dreams of cooking something and it has not come to pass, it's going to be a lot cheaper to buy the pre-chopped thing and to actually use it as opposed to buying the unchopped thing, not using it, and then ordering takeout. Okay. Here's all our mushrooms. I'm gonna go get my tray for my toaster oven. So I've got this tray and I'm going to line it with parchment paper. Wow. And then I'm just going to load all my mushrooms onto it. Parchment paper is one of my absolute favorite kitchen tools because it saves me a lot of dishes. If I can line all of my baking sheets, baking trays, wire racks with parchment paper, then I don't have to wash them afterwards. I just throw away the paper, which is awesome. I'm gonna go put this in my toaster oven. Now I'm gonna be posting a video with my favorite kitchen tools for people who have ADHD pretty soon. So if you're interested in that, definitely subscribe because I think that having the right tools makes a huge difference. A big one for me is anything that has a timed shut off is huge because then I won't forget to take things out and then it reduces the likelihood that I'm gonna burn something. Okay. So that's more or less the soup sorted. When the mushrooms are done, I'll dump them in this pot. When the grains are done, I'll put them in this pot and I just need to season it and that's done. So that is all gonna go onto the back burner right now. The next thing I'm gonna prep is my kind of lunch option number 2, and I'm gonna do like a roasted veggie chickpea salad thing. So we're gonna prep all the ingredients for that so that when it comes time to put it together, I just have to basically dump everything in a bowl and put a dressing on top. So the first thing I'm gonna do is cook the quinoa, and my lentils and barley are all done. So I'm gonna pull that out. Just use my sleeves here to pull that out. And we're gonna give this a quick stir. So you can see you got a nice barley and lentil mix. So I'm just gonna put that on the side. Ooh. And then I'm gonna get another Instant Pot liner. I have like 4 of these for this exact purpose. And we're gonna get some quinoa going. Now you can totally rinse your quinoa if you want to. Again, I don't have the patience to do that, so I'm not gonna do that. I personally don't find that there's a huge difference in flavor for me, but some people really don't like the bitterness of quinoa. I don't mind it. If you don't like the bitterness, if you feel like it's a little bit too funky, you can always rinse this really thoroughly first. All right, and now I put the water in. I'm just gonna put this in the Instant Pot for 8 minutes. So now we're gonna roast some vegetables. I'm bringing a bowl out to put the veggies in, and then I'll toss them with just a little bit of olive oil. If you don't wanna do that, you don't have to put them in a bowl if you wanna save a dish, but that's what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna start with a delicata. This is my absolute favorite winter squash because I think the texture is really nice and you can eat the skin, so you don't have to peel it. I find that for me, I hate winter squash because I really hate having to deal with that peel. I feel like I'm gonna cut myself when I'm wrestling it. And delicata is so much easier that way. And I find it's sweeter than all of the other squashes. So, okay. Just gonna take my scrap bin and do this. I have a compost bin outside and I always put my seeds into it. And every year I usually get some volunteers. So this year in my garden, I tried to grow delicata squash intentionally and I wasn't successful because I had a pest issue. However, the delicata squash seeds that were in my compost that sprouted, I ended up getting like 7 delicata squash off of those ones. So I'm never mad about volunteers in my compost bin because I find that they tend to be the healthiest and most robust plants. I feel like they do that just to spite me, but maybe I'm taking it too personally. Ugh. Okay. Too slippery. Ooh, starting to smell the mushrooms. It's great. Now, the trick to very efficient meal prepping is to do exactly like you see me do, and that is to kind of layer things in terms of the amount of time it takes to cook them. So you always want to start with the thing that's going to take the longest to cook, that's going to require the least babysitting. So soup is always a really nice thing to add to your meal prep because it's now just doing its thing while I can make other stuff. That one's a little too thick. We'll do that. So, you know, that's why I always usually do one thing that has to be baked or boiled. Because if you can cook multiple things at the same time, you can make a lot more food in the shorter amount of time. So I'm just going to drizzle a little bit of olive oil on this. Not a lot. I don't particularly like things too oily, so I try to use the smallest amount possible, and if things feel a little bit too shiny and greasy in here, I usually will take a paper towel and blot some off. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One is I don't like the texture. personally. And the other reason is because oil is incredibly calorie dense. Now, I don't really think about calories ever when I'm cooking, but I find that if I'm using a ton of oil, that I have to really think about portion size. And I personally like to eat a large meal. I think that feels good. It kind of gets my dopamine boosted and makes me feel a lot more satisfied and less likely to snack between meals if I can actually get to that place of feeling satisfied. And I find that if my food is really, really greasy, that eating the volume that feels good for my body will often result in weight gain. I don't think there's anything necessarily inherently wrong with having your weight fluctuate a little bit, especially if you're eating a lot of foods that are nourishing. But this is a very easy thing to modify to make my diet work for me. We're gonna pull out a baking tray. Not the cleanest, but I don't really care because I'm gonna line it with our good friend, the parchment paper. All right. I'm just gonna kind of push these down in a neat little layer. I don't want them to be stacked up too much because I want them to get a good like sear on the bottom of the pan. All right, so I still have some room. So let's think about what else I could add to this. What would be good? Maybe some carrots. I love roasted carrots. Shouldn't have put these away so soon. So let's put out a few of these carrots. And we'll roast some carrots too. Good thing I didn't dump my peeler in the sink. You could wash these too. You do not have to peel carrots if you give them a good wash. But the peels on these are a little bit funky and they look like maybe in the grocery store they saw a little bit of frost because they're kind of wrinkly. So that's why I'm peeling these today. I also find that peeling, they kind of come out better when they're roasted if they have been peeled, because sometimes the peel will like get wrinkly and separate when they're roasted, as opposed to having like the whole carrot be kind of, I don't know, more intact. Arbitrary things though, ultimately, because they're gonna taste the same. But for me, the look of things makes a big difference. If I don't like the way things look, I often won't eat it. You will also notice that I cut off a lot more of certain veggies than I probably need to, and that can contribute to food waste. However, for me, if there are odds and bits that my brain goes, I don't know, that feels a little bit sus, I just won't eat it. I will tell myself that I will, and then I won't, and then things will rot in my fridge. So when it comes to cooking and choosing what you're gonna make and how you're gonna prepare it, I highly recommend working with yourself and not against yourself. Like, don't try to change you to fit like the habit you want to cultivate. You want to have the habit and the way you execute that habit to fit you, because you're going to be a whole lot harder to change than the habit. So be realistic. Don't fool yourself. All right. Throw these in my little toss bowl. Now, my soup is boiling behind me, so I'm going to give it a stir. I'm gonna let that kind of boil away. Oh, it rolled up onto the floor. I feel like you guys are seeing a lot of my forehead and not a lot of my face. But I don't want to lose a finger. Oh. Okay. Now these, I really don't care if they're on top of each other, because when these sear, like the sugars come out and they caramelize, and that's really nice. It doesn't happen so much with carrots. So if they're on top, I don't care as long as they get cooked. So we're gonna huck these in the oven. So now we're gonna do something for our salad that's going to add protein, calories, carbohydrates, satiation, right? Because we don't want a salad to just be greens and veggies, because then it's just not going to meet our nutritional needs. I think that when people do that, that's usually when they start to have a lot of cravings later on in the evening, or they overdo it at dinner, because it's really easy for a salad to just not be enough. So usually we're going to do chickpeas. So I'm just putting the chickpeas into our bowl. And these I cooked yesterday, because chickpeas take a lot longer to cook, so I didn't do these simultaneously. And yes, it is another liner. We have a lot of them for this reason. So a lot of times when I'm planning a salad, I'm usually thinking, okay, what is going to provide protein, calories, and carbohydrate first? before I think about what's going to add flavor. So for this salad, the things that are going to actually make this satiating in a whole meal that is going to last me, I'm going to be adding the chickpeas and the quinoa. And the delicata squash, to an extent too, is going to contribute to that. The greens for the salad, I have pre-washed arugula, pre-washed spinach, and pre-washed Bib lettuce. So all of those things I can just throw into a bowl, basically. I don't have to do any prep for those. So to make this exciting, I want to season these chickpeas, because if they were just plain chickpeas, I mean, I would still eat it. I love plain chickpeas, but in the context of a salad, I want it to be exciting, or else I'm just going to choose something else. So how are we going to make these chickpeas exciting? We're going to make them kind of herby and roasted and slightly mashed so that they're a huge source of flavor in and of themselves. We've got herbs. I have dill, which I have left over from last week because I used them in a recipe last week. I'm just going to chop up the dill nice and fine. I love dill. It is absolutely one of my favorite herbs. So we're gonna make them nice and herby. These are kind of done, so I'm gonna add this to my scrap pile is getting really big. I feel like I need a bigger bowl for that. All right, and then we have parsley, which is still wet from rinsing. I'm just gonna get wet water everywhere. Okay. Okay, and I like this to be chopped fine if I can. It's a little bit unruly. I always love parsley like as an essence because it brings a really nice brightness, and I find that when I'm adding parsley I usually need less salt, but I also don't want to bite into a huge chunk of parsley. I want it to be pretty fine. So that is a lot of herbs actually, which is good. We want it to be very fresh and very flavorful, and we want it to kind of be a flavor focal point for our dish. I am going to roast these in a little bit, but so I want to add a little bit of an oil, but this is something I like to do. So I'm not going to use this because I want to add flavor. This is really good. I think something like olive oil or avocado oil or other oils are really good for roasting if you don't want to taste it. And you just want it to improve the texture. If you're trying to build flavor though, it's not my favorite thing. So I'll show you what I often like to use. I love artichoke hearts. They're one of my favorite things to snack on or put into recipes, much to my husband's chagrin because he's not a huge fan, but I'm the one who does the cooking, so sucks to suck. I love using the kind of oily brine because it's already herby and it's really flavorful. So I often use that as my oily base whenever I'm making something where I want to build flavor, especially in an herby context, because it's already kind of an herby flavor. So that is like one of my favorites. Although I've already done that a few times, and this one is water and oil, and that was mostly water. But that's okay. I don't need a lot of oil for it. So I'm going to salt it next, add some salt. I keep my salt in a jar so that I can pinch, because I find that if not, the shaker just doesn't get enough out and I get impatient. And then if I'm doing like a bigger tub that I can pour, I end up throwing a lot down the sink. So I like this, and I live in a humid place, so this keeps it from getting all clumpy. And you could add whatever seasonings you like, but that's enough for me. Now I think our mushrooms are done, so I'm gonna pull those out. So these have kind of dehydrated right down. So I'm gonna huck them in our soup. And what's nice about doing this way, even if you're gonna like put them on pasta or something, is it really like locks in the flavor. So these are like extra flavorful. Beautiful. But I'm gonna hook that away. This is hot, so I'm just gonna put this on this towel here. And I hope this shows you that cooking doesn't always have to be neat and tidy. It can also be a little bit chaotic. Like, your kitchen is a workstation. It's a workstation just like your office desk is a workstation. It's a workstation just like anything in your life is a workstation. And I think that we often don't think about cooking as labor in that same way, as requiring the same space and tools and investment as other kinds of labor. But for me, this kitchen probably gets the most use out of any room in my house. Ah! I gotta rinse the hands off. And so investing in tools to make it easier, to make it faster, makes a huge difference. Okay, so I'm gonna huck these back in my toaster oven. It's great because it's already preheated, so that shouldn't take too long. So we're just going to roast those. And again, what that's going to do is it's going to help get some of the water out, which is going to improve the texture of the chickpeas. It's going to improve the flavor of the whole dish. And so anytime I can roast something, I like to do that. So once those come out, we're going to put them back in the bowl and we're going to do just like a slight mash. Because again, in a salad, I don't always want to bite into a big hunk of chickpea. I like it to be more dispersed, especially if I'm doing it with the quinoa. I think that is actually about it. So I have the Herby roasty chickpeas. I have the quinoa, which is actually already done in my Instant Pot. So that's done. And then I have my soup here, which just needs to simmer and be seasoned. And then I have our roasted veggies, which are going to have to come out. So the salad will end up being the lettuce, the quinoa, the chickpeas, and the roasted veggies, and then a dressing on top. Now for the dressing, I could right now, because I have nothing to do, we're all kind of hanging out, I could make a dressing, or a bottle dressing is perfectly fine for something like that. So I find that for me, a lot of times I don't prep a dressing in advance because what I want flavor-wise tends to change day to day. So making a dressing in the moment is usually a really good way for me to have variation in my meals when I'm doing a meal prep. So I can choose whatever sounds good. So for example, for this thing that I'm making that's a little bit herby, I might do a balsamic kind of dressing. I might do a apple cider vinegar tahini dressing. I do have a couple of really great bottle dressings that I like. I love to have like a poppy seed dressing is one of my favorites, so I could use that. Oh, I almost forgot one more thing I need to prep. So this week for breakfast, I really want to do something savory. And so one of my favorite savory go-to breakfasts is avocado toast. And I put like maybe lentils or seasoned tofu or nothing on it, hot sauce, sprouts, veggies. I love avocado toast. Where I live, I don't really have access to really good bread for that, especially whole wheat bread. And I try to eat as much whole grain stuff as I can because I like it and it's an easy way to get an extra fiber. So I usually make my own bread. So I need to get that started or else I'm not going to have something for breakfast this week. I'm just going to reuse this bowl. And if you notice, a lot of how I do my meal prep is trying to preserve dishes because I hate doing dishes. Even I have a dishwasher, which is life-changing, but I still hate doing dishes. So far in terms of the dishes I have dirtied with this, I have pretty much just used this bowl. I have to huck this out to the compost, but then I have that bowl. And then I just have this pot, but I'm going to store the soup in the pot. So this doesn't have to be washed right away. My Instant Pot liners probably don't have to be washed right away because I will store them in the refrigerator that way. So really the only things that are going to have to be washed is this bowl, this spoon, this knife, and this peeler is basically it for all of this stuff that I'm making. And actually now that I'm using this to start bread in, my bread is going to ferment overnight. So I don't have to wash this bowl today either. So these are the only dishes I'm actually going to have to wash today. To make bread, and I have a video going through my entire like super easy bread making process. So if you guys are curious on how I make bread, definitely check that out. I'll link that below. I don't measure for this either, which I know a lot of people are gonna be like, Natalie, you're crazy. You're supposed to measure when you bake. Even with baking, I cannot be bothered to follow a recipe. I am chaos, I know. But again, recipes are a barrier between me and actually cooking. So I just add a bunch of whole wheat flour. This is just Vital Wheat gluten. I add this to my whole wheat bread because it improves the texture and the spring of it. I find that whole wheat bread can be a little bit dense if you don't add gluten. And I don't like a dense bread, personally. I mean, it's whole wheat, it's gonna be a little bit dense, but I want the nice bubbles. I want it to have that nice springy texture, and adding a little extra gluten will do that. I'm gonna stir that through. So I need to add salt. Some. If it's not salty enough and it tastes bland, then I'll just add salt on top of my toast. So this is just some lukewarm water. I'm just going to pour this whole thing in because I know from experience that I'm going to need more than this. So I'm going to fill this up again. Now, this is my sourdough starter. I did not feed this in advance. If you're curious why, check out that video I linked. I'm just going to take a big spoonful of my starter, or a couple, some. That's probably plenty. Maybe it's not. It'll be fine. This thing is going to ferment for long enough that it will multiply either way. I'm just going to stir it into the water. I'm just going to go in here with my hands and get this all mixy. No, I actually don't need more water. I feel like I've been making bread in a bigger bowl lately, so my eyeballing for the flour has been a little off. Although I actually added just the right amount. This is great. There's no dry flour. It's super shaggy. I am done kneading. That's it. That's all I have to do to pretty much prep the bread. It's so flippin' easy. Now I have this nice little fermenting cover. Wah! And I'm going to put this in a warm place like my pellet stove, and then about once every 30 minutes or so, or actually really whenever I remember between now and the time I go to bed, I'm just going to pop in and sort of give it a turn. That's kind of all I need to do. This is a no-knead bread, and that's actually really important for whole wheat bread because the fiber in whole wheat bread and whole wheat flour can cut up the gluten strands and make it denser. So kneading less for whole wheat actually makes a better textured bread, which is great for me because I like things that are low effort. So this goes over on my pellet stove to ferment, and I will bake this tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow morning, sometime tomorrow. And if you want to see what the finished product looked like, again, you can see an example of that in the video I did on how to make this. So put this to bed. I'm going to take you with me over here so that you can see how this soup is doing. This has kind of been on a simmer. I've not really touched it. So we're going to just kind of put this all together and do the seasoning now. Okay, so I'm just going to add my lentils and my barley. We're going to add it all. Now, as this simmers, the barley is going to kind of release a little bit of starch, which will make this soup a little bit thicker. If it's not thick enough, I may do a cornstarch slurry just to thicken the broth. Now, at this point, I've not added any seasoning, so I'm going to add some seasoning. Although the broth is actually pretty flavorful on its own. We are going to add rosemary. I don't know, some. I might add more because rosemary is a really great flavor for a soup like this. Thyme. Ugh, annoying. I like a lot of thyme personally. I'm a big fan of thyme, so it's going to be a very thymy soup. I'm almost out of bay leaves, so we're just going to add, that's probably really ill-advised because you don't want to eat those. It's pretty gross, but you're going to have no choice. It's going to be hard to pull out. Oh well. Onion powder. Just going to smash. Garlic powder. And then I'm going to add, I have this mushroom umami seasoning blend from Trader Joe's, which, there's a little stuck. Just to kind of boost that mushroom flavor. And there's like a little bit of like chili in here, so it kind of gives it a bit of a kick. So we're going to stir all that in. And the nice thing is the bread that we make will also be very good with this. Totally forgot, but I was going to add white wine, so I'm adding that now. Better late than never, I say. And then I'm going to add my favorite bouillon, which is the Better Than Bouillon No Chicken base. So this is a vegan paste. And I really like this because I find that when I use vegetable broth from the container, not only is it expensive to do that, but I also find that I usually never need the exact amount that's in the container, and then I always end up wasting some. With this, I don't. I just add as much as I need, and this lasts a really long time because it's mostly salt. Now, as it's boiling, I'm realizing that I want it to be a little bit thicker than it is, so I've just done a little bit of cornstarch in water in a slurry. And I'm going to add that, and that is just going to thicken the soup a little bit to make it more like a stewy kind of texture. Yeah, see, like I want this to not be quite so watery. I want it to be nice and thick. So we're just going to stir a little bit of that in there and then see how we land. It's closer to what I want. Now, I also want it to kind of have a bit more of like a creamy vibe, like a cheesy vibe. So I'm adding some nutritional yeast. And this is just a great way to make things taste cheesy without dairy. That is splattering. I thickened it successfully, but maybe too successfully. All right. And there you have it. All right, so our roasted veggies are pretty much done. Okay, so these guys are done. They're nice and roasty and soft. We are just going to load some stuff into Tupperwares. right, just slide that in there. So we're gonna set this off to cool. And here our chickpeas are also done roasting. So we're gonna put them in here and then mash them up. Just gonna take a fork and do a very light mash. I don't want these to be like hummus. I just want them to be a little bit less whole, I suppose. Delicious. Now our soup is done as well. We have this really awesome, good mushroom, thick, hearty, kind of creamy soup. We have our roasted veggies and our roasted chickpeas, which are gonna go into a salad. And our quinoa is done as well. And I am gonna transfer this into a Tupperware just for the sake of fridge space. And last but not least, we have our bread. So with the simple meal prep, I have 2 different options that can be used for lunch or dinner, plus this bread, which is going to be used for breakfast. So is this gonna prep everything for my week? No, not necessarily. But this didn't take very much time at all and is gonna save me a lot of time during the week. So I hope this body doubling cook with me video was helpful to you. If you like this and you want more of this, let me know. And also let me know if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover. I'm happy to turn some of these videos into a Q&A or have some teaching topics if there's things you guys would like to learn about. And if there's some recipes you'd like me to do in a simple way or to do plant-based, let me know that as well. See you guys in the next video.